Alrighty. So welcome everyone back from your Easter break. We've got a pretty packed agenda today, which I think we actually always do, and I probably end up saying that, but we do. We've got the usual business and updates. There's quite a few, I think, coming out of the really good few days that we had when we were in Sydney. There was a really productive kind of set of face-to-face meetings, although it was hybrid as well, for the FHIR work group and the AU Core TDG, and we're going to do a little bit of updates on that. Updates on some of the actions, some of which we're going to see today on the change proposals. Some of the other updates that will affect us coming out of the FHIR work group meeting. We'll also do a report back from Connectathon, and then go through the change proposals, and then talk through the ballot resolution meetings. At the end of this, we need to make a decision on our meeting times post daylight savings, and I've got a poll there for us to kind of agree on where do we go now, and if we keep those meeting times, but if we're keeping them, are we keeping them for Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, or do we want to move to keeping those times for Brisbane? There's a slide and some poll options we'll get to and talk about what the next meeting agenda is. So I'm going to kick off into our usual business, which is talking about the previous meeting. Now, the meeting minutes have been sent out for review. I think all of that feedback is in there, unless someone wants to pop their hand up or put something in the chat that says that they're still reviewing them and they need to, I guess, have more time before we approve those. Pause for that. No, that looks like we're happy with the minutes of the last meeting. Can I ask then if someone's happy to motion?
I'll move.
Thanks, Heath. Is someone happy to second approval of the minutes?
I'll second.
Sorry, who was that?
Jai.
Thanks, Jai. So I'll launch the meeting poll now for approval of that. Okay. And for those of you who are very familiar with this, please go through and select your option. For those of you where this is your first meeting, go ahead and just select the abstain button. We do want everyone on the call to be voting, and that includes both the people who were there and are reviewing the minutes, and also the people who actually haven't been involved up until that point. All right, fantastic. That looks like we have voted. I will end that poll now and share the results. So that motion is carried with no negatives and with affirmatives and a significant proportion of abstain. Can everyone see the results, or did I not actually successfully do that? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'll stop sharing that. Now, we made some significant decisions, I think, that came out of the face-to-face, which was intended to be around medications and also around procedure. On the medications, we came to the position in the TDG that the AU-CDI medication use statement is represented by the medication profile, by the medication FHIR resource, medication statement. And we also talked about what are we having in scope for R1, what are our priorities? And we came to the position that AU Core medication request is the priority for R1 from the AU Core Technical Design Group. And that means that AU Core medication statement will move to R2. But if we have time in R1, we'll work on AU Core medication statement. And we also need to add into the AU Core IG some content around the future of AU Core that highlights that this is coming and when it will be available. We also went through then and had a pretty productive session on procedure. We talked about that AU CDI procedure completed event is AU core procedure, and we confirmed that we wanted this in the R1 scope. We successfully progressed removing must support from status reason, category, recorder, asserter, and body site. There's a PR, I think, that's currently open on the AU core that should be merged maybe today or tomorrow, pending review outcomes. And we also had, in line with that, to add guidance on how to do body site procedure, which is in line with what we've done around the decision on AU core condition. So I'm going to move on there to give an update on the ballot for comment. So this is our original timeframes for that, where the ballot period was intended to be closed at the end of last week. And I think I sent an email around talking about having a first pass in triage. Due to some technical issues, which this has been delayed, I think that means it closes tomorrow. And that also means that the ballot resolution, instead of starting, I guess, really in this meeting, actually kicks off next week. We still have the same end goals, like the overall hasn't shifted, just some of that ballot resolution has been delayed. A bit of an update there is, so 78 people have signed up. As of about 15 minutes ago, we've had I think, 16 people have completed their ballot voting. So there are 2 that are holding the affirm position, 12 in negative, and 2 that have abstained. We've still got 62 people who'd signed up to vote to progress that, noting I think some people are still discovering maybe some technical issues. And I think we'll work with HL7 Australia and HL7 International to get that right for our August ballot. So very, very pleased we've done a ballot for comment in March. Are there any questions about that or anything someone wants to raise for the HL7AU members on the line before I move on for that? All right, let's kick on. So we have some actions. And Brett, I'll just get you to talk to that first one, which is the action out of our previous face-to-face relating to that we're still looking to develop the guidance material, I guess we agreed on to add to AU Core due to removing must support from AU Core procedure and AU Core condition.
Yep, so that there is a ticket now that's raised about the guidance, so I will send that through. I'll drop that in the chat in a second for the minutes, and also there's a branch that's still being worked on, but there's some material there now, so that is essentially the proposal for that. So I think so that just covers off the stuff we discussed around examples and guidance on how to approach representing body site and laterality especially when body site is no longer must support. So I think the question is probably how do we move that forward, and whether I should I'm pretty close to just rounding that out as having it up and ready. So whether we move to having an e-vote or something on it, or do people want to review it in a call before that, is probably the question.
Okay, so that's a question out then to the technical design group. We've agreed that we need to add guidance to the guidance page on how to address this with examples. There's a branch that Brett is working on in order to include that content into AU Core. Does anyone prefer reviewing that kind of asynchronously through an electronic vote, or do we want to hold that over to a technical design group meeting and walk through that in a conference call? If no one wants to speak up, I'll ask if someone wants to. Oh, sorry. Yes, Richard?
I'd like to say we hold over for conference call, because I think there could be a bunch of complications that would be worth having discussed publicly.
Oops, I don't know how that went backwards. Apologies.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah. If that's the case, I'll put out, I think, a group, maybe a note to the list when I think I'm done, and then that way I'll send you the links, and that should then be available to review before the call.
Maybe we can have a bit of a Zulip chat as well if there's feedback in between. But I agree. I think it's worth, even if it's Richard's probably more pessimistic than I am, which is unusual. But
I think
it's not worth having 5 minutes in a TDG or 10 minutes or whatever.
I think it's worth doing that, getting people review, because I also kind of considered a couple of cases that we didn't really talk about, which are kind of just the other possibilities in terms of how people might have their body site and laterality recorded. So that it essentially probably isn't relevant really to many systems, because we didn't see much feedback as such, but I just kind of wanted to round it out in terms of how you might approach it. Yep.
Was it generic guidance, separate page, or is it specific to procedure?
No, it's on the general guidance page. So that's and there's a few different bits and pieces on that page on different subjects. And so this one's particularly around the profiles that have body site that are currently in the spec, which are procedure and condition. We may need to update it when service request comes in as well. So
So it is
maybe
specific to those two profiles. It just happens to be on a larger page that has lots of things with subheadings.
Yeah.
Can I suggest we have a link to that from the procedure page and whatever other profile it's referring to?
Actually, that's
I think I would have assumed that was a given, and is why we'll do review feedback.
It will be a given once I've done it. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll add that to the agenda for the next technical design group, which is in a fortnight, which makes that the 18th, I think, of April. And if you can send that round, Brett, or if you get that ready when we send out the minutes, depending on the time frames, we can include that as part of the minutes from this, that is there for review. Yeah,
that's good. So there's I just included the ticket and the branch links there, so that can go in the minutes. But I'll let people know when I think I'm done. So
okay.
Noting that last thing, I'll make that happen too in the branch, and I'm pretty much done, so it should be out today.
Okay, I'm happy with that. I think we can call that action closed when that comes out, and we've got that in the next meeting. The next two actions came out of the face-to-face on some decisions we discussed, but did not reach a conclusion on to bring into this meeting. And we do have those as change proposals here. So I think we can just move on from talking about those as actions and say that they're closed because we're going to go through them in this meeting. And our last point here, Andrew, are you on the line?
I am.
Thanks, Andrew. I talked with Andrew today, and I think we have an option here to stop tracking this as an action, because the JIRA issue around pulse rate has actually been tagged to come into the AU core ballot, and therefore we need to track and manage that through ballot resolution. So I think we could move to doing that instead of tracking that as a meeting action.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. If we can track it under the ballot resolution, that would be a preferable route for that.
Does anyone have any objections to that? Noting we will be tracking the closure of this, it just stops us from tracking it in two ways. Okay, so if no one has any objections to that, we'll close this issue, noting that it is therefore going to be tracked as part of the JIRA ballot resolution. And at that point, I think I'm going to ask Brett to talk about the AU base and AU core variance process. I realise I've not updated this slide because we just did an update on ballot for comment. Brett, are you happy to talk to what one of the outcomes from the recent FHIR work group was on this?
Yeah, so I think there will be more detail coming in terms of exactly what this means, but primarily the FHIR work group sort of discussed approaches to how downstream IGs should state any variance from the AU core and AU base profiles. So basically, if you are in conflict with AU core or AU base in your spec, there has to be a statement of such, and reasoning and some understanding there. And the way we want that reflected is on a specific page in the in each downstream FHIR IG. So that will be a specific page covering variance, and that may be that you're not varying as well as a statement. So this is really just to especially enable people implementing to really understand if there's differences. It's certainly a help, I think, if that's available, and it also is a reviewable artifact in terms of the FHIR work group can look at it and understand the variance and reasoning behind it in a spec as part of essentially as part of approval for balloting, and also in the balloting process itself if people want to feedback on that variance and things around it. Heath.
Just to clarify that we're talking about HL7AU downstream profiles, not
correct
implementers profiles. Yeah.
Correct. Although we would really appreciate it if you did. So I think it's definitely part of HL7AU processes, and so we will be adding this to sort of requirements for specs. So even say the provider directory spec, if it moves forward as an HL7 Australia spec, we'll expect that to be added and reflect their current state. It is also a bit of a prompt for the groups working on those IGs to actually assess that explicitly, which we want them to do. Richard.
You also, when creating profiles and IGs, sometimes you want to talk about agreement. This thing is in agreement with that, or this thing also supports that, or this thing mirrors that. I'm just wondering whether variance is just, in a sense, another flavor of this, and how the statements about variance can wind up being included in the same sort of places you'd have statements about agreement. But maybe variance is, say, got a HL7 international pattern that we want to follow.
There is a bit of that, and US Core certainly has this. I think it's also really it's flagging potential problems, and effectively it's flagging work. If you are kind of say, oh, my system's AU core compliant, I'm pretty I'm satisfied that I'm doing that, then another spec comes along and has some variance from that in its requirements. That gives you an immediate ability to say, I can't directly use that immediately. I have to think about it. Yep.
But at the time that you see thing which says, I don't quite follow that, you'd also be looking for things which says, well, what do you follow? And you might say, well, I follow IPS, but I don't follow AU core.
Yeah.
I think what I was going to say is I think there's an underlying principle that goes above this, which is that all HL7 Australia profiles shall or should implement AU core. And then if it doesn't, this is why. So you're probably right, Richard, but there is that first step, which is PD2 should implement AU core, but it doesn't because of this.
Yeah. it's very much managing the harmonization of the specs, right? Because obviously people kind of look at AU base, and if you directly derive from it, you kind of have that built in. But we're also talking about specs that may not directly derive from some of these things, but can be essentially compatible, compliant, conformant, whatever the word is. Andy? Oh, can't hear you, Andy. Oh, yes, we can.
This is for specs. This is downstream IGs, which are not conformant and are simply stating the reason why they're not claiming conformance.
Yeah. So if they think, effectively they've got, so this will be essentially modified. Like it's about saying I'm taking the definition in AU Core and I have to change it because this is not satisfactory to achieve my use case, right? So primarily it's also a driver to push that back through into AU Core and AU Base as well, to consider why they aren't suitable for some of these use cases, and then that can kind of then at least be worked on at the various levels, as well as part, and that will definitely be something that's reviewed in balloting, by many people, but through development as well.
If there was only one aspect of AU Core that you didn't meet, say there was a particular profile and it just didn't meet your need, but everything else you were using, what kind of statement do you need to make? Like you can't claim.
Oh no,
we're going to time. So we'll time box that. If we want to go into more detail here as well, we'll schedule that to a separate meeting. If there's interest in doing that from the AU Core perspective, this will need to come through the e-requesting as well and other spaces. Yeah,
I'd rather move it to the FHIR work group if we want to have this discussion, because we have to actually consider what we're actually expecting people to document. And I think that'll get down to that level of detail in terms of what we're expecting to be on that statement. And we haven't really got into that as such, in terms of the FHIR work group. Yeah.
So it's a wiki page, isn't there, Brett? Then maybe you just give that reference so that Andy can have a look at because I think there was a lot of detail there that would be useful to Richard and Andy.
Yeah, we could drop that in a chat. There was like a draft statement, which is kind of like the premise, and I think that's worth looking at. That was discussed in the FHIR work group. But I think we have to get down to a level of detail. In terms of what essentially it would be good to have a standard template for presenting it, so people could read it easily and understand what people are stating as well.
And so as I understand it, that's the proposal the FHIR work group is going to provide. So this is this is the decision from the FHIR work group. It will affect us in AU Core and downstream IGs. AU Core will need to state its compliance with AU base and where it varies, which I'm pretty sure we don't at the moment, but we'll have to be clear about that.
Yeah.
And the FHIR work group is defining the process and will send a directive to each of the, projects like AU Core e-requesting provider directory on what they need to do. I also think that the FHIR work group is going to provide a template of what does that look like. If you're interested, this is going to continue to be discussed in the FHIR work group at the next FHIR work group meeting. Could you drop that in, maybe Brett, into the chat on when that is and what the Zoom link is for people who want to come along to it?
Yep, I can get that in a second. Yep.
Okay, great.
Cool. It's also worth noting, I think this, whilst we're talking about HL7 Australia committees here too, this is something I think is on the cards to discuss with our AFCC, the coordination committee, and talking about what is good FHIR community process and sort of publication quality kind of aspects that for any external specs that are kind of being working through that process, which is external to HL7 Australia. I think there's a number. I'm certainly keen to have a few specific artifacts that are part of the assessment of that work. So, but that's still a future thing.
Foreshadowing. Thanks,
foreshadowing.
Brett. So let's just pop on. Next update then is around a new addition to the Spark team. We're very fortunate that Michael Wilson is coming and joining us as the Spark FHIR Solution Architect. which means we have someone who will be in that solution architecture space, who is going to work closely with the technical community and look really in terms of architecture and around RESTful APIs, and focus really around spending time with facilitating community and spending some research on some of the things we need to do, and then still bringing that obviously through the technical design group. Michael, do you just want to pop on camera and introduce yourself really briefly? We're running a little bit behind.
Yeah, I'll be quick, but excited to be here. I'm going to be working across AU Core and e-requesting. I think definitely when we get into pilot testing and validation and the like, I'll be there to help and guide you all through it. So reach out to me. I'm here. Just grab me. Whatever you need.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so we're going to do a report back on the Connectathon, which was a pretty awesome couple of days, I understand. So here I'm going to stop sharing, and Heath is going to start sharing and do that report back. Thanks, Heath. We can see that.
Okay, just find the new mute button. Okay, so I will try and skip through this pretty quickly. Stop me if there's any questions. Basically, yeah, it was a really good couple of days around Connectathon. These were the goals that we're trying to achieve, but primarily we were there to start exploring how implementers can work with AU Core and start that validation process of their systems against AU Core. But we also had a really good group of, or an interesting group of people that were actually IG authors there as well. So I believe, I didn't get involved in that, but I believe Dishi was working with some of those to see how they could leverage the AU Core IGs and build their own specific IGs from that. There was a lot. There was, I guess, a couple of handfuls of vendors there that were actually doing profile and interaction conformance requirements. I don't remember anyone specifically doing profile only at that one, but probably from a Spark perspective, it was really there, not here on this list, but there was actually testing the a lot of the infrastructure that has been put in place by the Spark team. So it was the AU Core reference server in particular, the Inferno test client, etc. And we got some really good feedback on those as well. These were the scenarios that we were looking at testing. We didn't really, I guess, specifically focus on these because a lot of the vendors were actually working with Inferno specifically, which actually went beyond just this set of scenarios. So we had that couple of handfuls of participants there. And from various countries, good mix of primary care and acute care systems, as well as, I guess, back-end systems around having FHIR servers, etc., and a couple of clients as well. So we certainly had some smart forms launching from Epic and the Smart reference servers. We had Tech Intro, which was launching from Epic, Aidbox, Telstra, Spark reference servers. Create IT was an interesting scenario. They were more of an integrator, integration middleware component that sort of sits in between. So that was an interesting kind of, they were both a client or a requester and a responder. So that was an interesting scenario. Brett did some things around CDS hooks, which had a different flavor of things. And again, as I said, the Inferno test kit was tested out by Telstra, Aidbox and MediRecords. we got some really good feedback on the Inferno test cases and from various vendors in there, and we got some interesting discussions around how Inferno might be able to be used beyond just the Spark program as well. So that vendors might be able to leverage that within their own development processes. So is there any other questions or comments or anything else that people think was relevant to raise from their perspective for those that attended? No? Okay. In that case, I'll move on to the change proposals, Danielle.
Yep, no problems.
Okay, so on the day before the Connectathon, we had our face-to-face TDG, which was, as Danielle said, very productive. It was great to be in a room with people. We had some it was an interesting hybrid scenario as well. So technology was fighting us, but we got there in the end. But the session that I facilitated was around procedures and trying to map through the AU CDI procedure completed to AU core procedure, and then refining, I guess, the AU core procedure profiles around which items needed to be must support. As indicated in the actions, the two outstanding items were around clinical indication, which we had a mapping to reason code as a primary scenario, and a date performed, which has a mapping to performedDateTime. But at the same time, there was still some questions about what do we do with reason reference? Is there some overlap around that? And also there are other data types for the performed element as well. So what happens if we've actually got a period, or it's a string or an age or a range, etc. So as we can see from an AU CDI perspective, they've actually defined things a little bit differently. Well, more specifically, they have indicated that clinical indication is a codable concept, which is the direct mapping to reason code, and date performed is a date, hence why the bolded ones have been picked out in this particular case. But it's more about whether we want AU core to be more encompassing or not. So the current AU procedure performed is must support. So what that means is that at least one of those data types needs to be supported within your system. As I indicated, the AU CDI is really talking about it being a date, but interestingly, they've also indicated that the occurrences in AU CDI is optional. However, in AU core, we've actually indicated this is mandatory. So this wasn't covered in the last meeting, but I'm highlighting this perhaps for a little bit of discussion today as part of the proposal as well. As I said, date is the one that they've picked out as the important data type. What have we got in US core? So US core actually has the same set of types, but they've actually spelled out date time as a must support value. So the others are actually allowed, but the date time is mandatory. They have also made it optional as well, just as a correspondence. But what they do have is a condition or a constraint that says if the status of the procedure is completed or in progress, then the performed is mandatory. So because there are statuses such as not done, which obviously doesn't have a perform date. So that's how they've kind of dealt with the scenario of cardinality here, is through a constraint that takes into consideration a status. We have those same statuses, and yet we've actually said that performed is mandatory in this particular case. I guess we could look at using null flavors, etc., to indicate why that data is missing, but this perhaps is an alternate approach that we could consider as well. So, but back to the date time being must support. What are the obligations? So this was part of the action item, was to actually consider from an AU core what is the specific obligations of the requester and the responder roles around when we say that potentially date time is mandatory, must support, over and above what we currently have, which is just that performed is must support, and hence any one of those is allowed. I toot and froed a little bit on this, but finally, if we look at US Core again, they've actually made it quite explicit around what this means. So this is a choice of data types. This is an example of using observation effective, and where they've actually said effective date time is must support. What they've said here is that the responders shall be capable of populating effective date time, and requesters shall be capable of processing effective date time. Systems may support populating and processing other elements, but it's not a requirement of US Core. Now, I don't know if that clears things up for anyone, or whether it raises more questions, but I'll pause a little bit to see if there's any questions or commentary on that particular statement as it stands. Not hearing too much.
I guess it means that if two systems both comply, so they both support effective date time, they could agree to use effective period, which means that they're now meeting the demands. But the stuff they're exchanging is, so system-wise they're compliant, but the individual resources they're exchanging would be unintelligible to other people, which is sort of an interesting situation to be in.
Right.
I guess given I work at Sonic, I just make the comment that for us, this would just be collection date. So date, I don't know of a scenario where we would use period timing or instant, not to say there's nothing wrong with them being there, just highlighting that to us, we use observation heavily, and effective date and time would always be collection date and time, in my view.
Right.
Yeah, I see. I think that,
for specimen collection, it might not necessarily be just a single date time. Some of the specimen collections might span over 24 hours, so the period would be applicable.
It's probably true, and we probably never do it. We record a collection date and time, and to be honest, we don't even put effective date and times on our observations. We would put on our panel, so on diagnostic report, I guess, we would say the effective date and time of the diagnostic report is the collection date and time, and then it would have a list of observations, and we would be inferring that those observations are part of that report. You can do this in V2. I'm pretty sure we don't do it. I'll try and check that while I'm not talking. But...
Yeah.
So I would expect that it is not uncommon for the lab to receive, say, for example, 24 hours urine for evaluations for testings. Then, like for testing hormones, electrolytes, urea, etc. So in that particular case, then you wouldn't think that the period shouldn't be not supported.
Yeah, I think this is really, we just need to use this as an example. What we're really trying to, this is their general guidance in US Core, and they've used this as an example. So we're not here to debate whether that's valid. And in fact, that's why period is there, is because there are use cases where it could be used. But what is mandatory or must support is effectively what Angus is actually talking about, where the norm is to use a date time and the exception is to use one of the others. But what does that actually mean when, as Richard said, if a server did actually provide a period, then what does the downstream system do? Does it fall over and die, or does it have to support it? And that's so to me, this guidance helps but doesn't help. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think for summary observations, I think this is okay. Like, because I think if you really care about the collection business, then yeah, maybe you do want to do a period. But I think if you're just clinically getting a value, I think it's this is fine. I think this would be more of a discussion around in procedure, maybe, where periods
This
might
is-
be. Yeah.
Yeah, this is procedure.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten distracted by the
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is just a snippet from US Core where basically it is general guidance. It's about choice of data types, and when you put must support on a choice element. So the must support at the effective level says any one of these elements. The effect, you have to provide one of these. You must support one of them, but they're going one step further and saying you must provide date time or must support date time. You can support the others if you want, but there is no obligations from US Core perspective to do so.
Yeah.
So do we want a similar principle for procedure is really what I'm trying to articulate.
I would argue that the procedure we will have to support at least the period as well, in addition to the date time. There are many complex procedures that spans over hours at a minimum. You look at procedures like coronary artery bypass, liver transplant, kidney transplant, heart lung transplants. Those procedures, you might want to record and exchange precision of the start and end time. And so therefore, by way of what Richard just said, that if we only declare date time as must support and then system send the period, then the value died. And I think that is of a concern. If you then sort of are required to send sort of the period with start and end, and then downstream system won't process them.
So, but is it a minimum requirement? And that's really, I guess, what we're trying to work through here is with AU Core, core of the core, what is the minimum must support obligation on both a requester and a responder? Are we going to force every client to support all 4 types? Effectively, that's what we're doing right now. That we're saying that all of them need to be supported by a client, or a client is actually AU Core compliant if they at least support perform date time.
I would argue that given the commonality of complex procedures that happen every day, I would argue against such declaring the date time as must support. I would consider at least the period as must support.
Then I would go back to AU CDI and say, well, AU CDI, the CDG has agreed that date is all that is necessary. And that's from a AU Core perspective, where supporting what AU CDI is saying is the minimum, while we putting further obligations over and above what AU CDI is doing so. Danielle, you've got your hands up.
Yes, I have. So I'm just using that as chair to go, we're going to have to time box this to about 4 minutes remaining. And within that 4 minutes, we also have to go, where are we going to go from here if we can't close out that particular discussion? We'll have to hold that over and discuss how we do that.
Richard?
My point is that I think AU Core has to cover a wider range of cases than just being able to send complete medical information about a patient. That has to cover those other cases where there's less information available, and in some of those there won't be the dates that Stephen needs. And so my thought is that Stephen's expectations are needed for a bunch of interactions, but are probably too strong for what I'd expect to see in Core.
Okay, I guess there's going back to Danielle's time boxing and effectively how do we move forward? I guess one option is that I put a motion forward, see if there's a seconder, and because this is effectively my motion as presented on the screen, the proposal. If there's no seconder, then we look at how do we go forward.
I will second that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we go to a vote. Anyone?
So are there any comments or questions before we move to vote?
Are we voting on both bullet points or just the first one?
First one.
We have 3 sub-bullet points. So we are voting on that add must support to procedure perform date time, which means we're also approving what the definition of that obligations that are below that.
And effectively we're setting a precedent because this is the first time we've actually done this as well within AU Core. So the idea of actually specifying a particular data type is must support within a group of or choice of data types.
Okay, I'll ask now for any objections. Put your hand up if you don't agree.
Hey, Danielle, could I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So when we're talking about this, are we talking about this solely for procedures?
Yes.
Because the example, Heath, you had was lab orders, if I remember right, from the screenshot. So I just wanted to make sure we're only talking procedures. We're not talking about other use cases.
This is the US Core general guidance on must support for choice of data types. And it's an example that they have used. So this is a snippet straight from US Core. And I'm basically saying, using this as a precedent to basically apply to AU procedure or performed.
Okay. And do we think we're going to support the documentation of historical procedures that may not have an exact perform date and time known because they're from patient recall, et cetera?
That's the second dot point to some extent.
Yeah.
Where I'm basically suggesting that we go back to a 0 to 1 with no constraint. But yeah, that's not the motion on.
And so if we didn't know, by inference, and apologies for everybody for slowing this down, if the system of record didn't know the perform date and time, we would move into like, I think you were saying like a null flavor or something like that, or unknown or whatever, but you would consciously put that out there. Is that what we're saying we do in that instance?
Well, currently AU Core is indicating that performed is 1 to 1. So if you didn't have for value, you would actually have to specify a null flavor currently as AU Core is. So that's the second motion, I guess, that I'm saying let's remove that and don't add the constraint that US Core has done.
So I see that
because that would actually support your particular scenarios a little bit easier. And,
so and
aligns with AUCDI as well. So AUCDI has said that perform date is optional.
Okay, so then I guess where I'm confused is if we make the cardinality 0 to 1, but we still vote to upvote to say that the requester and responder shall be capable of populating or processing a performed date and time. Does that mean it has to be an explicit date and time, not a fuzzy or range or other kinds of things based on what got documented? Am I understanding that right?
You must support performed date and time. Whether you're a responder or a requester, you must be capable of processing as a requester. You must be capable of populating as a responder. You may support the other types, but it's not an AU core requirement.
And performed date time would include partial dates, dates without times, all those cases. So that should be, cover off.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. That's what I needed. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Apologies, Danielle.
No, that's fine. It's good. We're clarifying what this really means.
Richard, you had your hand up no longer.
Oh, I was going to say that without your proposal, what can happen is two people can both claim conformance to the profile, and one supports period and one supports date time, and they've no way of, sort of, it won't work together. While this one is saying that you've both got to support date time. And so it is actually increasing the chances that people's systems will align with each other.
I kind of think it actually says, does it say you have to support all of them if you're a receiver? If it's just on the choice, yep.
I think we'd have to go back to the US core guidance to actually see that. From reading it, it was basically saying one of. So I think actually Richard might be right, is that a client could state compliance because they supported period, and another one could state compliance because they support date time, and you will have a mismatch. So this at least says at least one of these is right, but we're not stopping you from supporting the others. It's just that.
But the one that supported period must also support date time.
Yeah.
And basically it's saying, if you're going to put a period here, you better be in a consortium of people who have all agreed to process period. Like you would want to be under another inherited IG that has made period must support. Otherwise, you're just running a risk that consumers and that won't be able to take it. But if you stick with date time or nothing, you're safe.
Well, I'm not sure that this is how a lot of people will read it. You have the must support at the data element level, and then you call out one of the data type as must support. If I have the ability to support any of the data type, then I can claim that I am conformant at the data element level. That's where your must support flag sits. So I'm not sure that this voting on this bullet point actually add any clarity.
I think it gives you some guarantees as to what will be supportable. Every requester and responder will be able to do date time.
Well, it only says that I have additional conformance at the daytime data type level. It doesn't say that I'm not conformant at the other data type level if you have the must support at the root level.
This is all open to interpretation, I guess, but my interpretation would be, as a responder, I could use a period, but it's at my own peril that the client may not be able to handle it. All right.
Yeah, if you use date time, you would know it would work.
Yeah, exactly. If I dump that period down and use the start date time of the period as my date time, yes, I'm losing some granularity that you're talking about, and I don't discount the clinical use cases. I'm now talking about how do we get some base level interoperability between systems without putting too much onus or obligation on all of those systems as a starting point.
Then what is the purpose of having a must support flag at the data element level? So does it mean that because one of the element you have to support, then the data element must have a support flag?
I am struggling with what's the point of point 3 at all. Like we're saying, and you may produce content that will break other systems.
Yes.
Like is should we be saying that? Should we? I mean, that's
well,
we're not explicitly saying we're actually saying it's not a requirement.
So I think if we're going to we can't continue to talk about this. We're running out of time. So it seems to me that we're actually going to need to hold it over because the group is not confident enough. Or do we feel like we can vote on this?
Can we vote on the second one more easily? The cardinality
Potentially.
one. Has anyone got? Has anyone got contention about the cardinality?
I'm happy to vote on both of them, and if it doesn't come up, then
Okay, I'll suggest that maybe we have. Angus, are you happy to? So we'll need to say that we could not continue the motion on the top one in this meeting because we continue to have discussions of comments before voting. But then can we move to that second bullet point? And Angus, is that you making a motion that we would remove the cardinality so that from 1 to 1 so it becomes optional?
I'm happy. I believe it's Heath, but I'm happy to support him. So.
Well, I'm happy for you to motion it. I'm motion it. You second either way.
Yeah. So okay, I motion the second one. Procedure remove the cardinality from 1 to 1. I'll motion that. But
just to clarify, there will be no constraint. So if it is active or in progress or completed, it will not have. It may not have a performed date time.
I think we're just opening up that it may be optional. There's probably more work to say there's some conditional rule that says in this kind of scenario it must be populated, but that's not what we're voting on. We're just at this.
I'm actually, my motion is that there is no constraint. Unlike US Core where they put the constraint, I'm saying it's just optional and there's no constraint based on status.
I'm okay for the cardinality to be relaxed to 0.1 or whatever.
Yeah. Happy as it's written.
I got a question. Just the the statuses on the procedure.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, we're going to actually close this because we can't continue then, but due to time boxing issues, we've not managed to get to the second item either. So we need to
so
close to we might have been, but we have continued comments and discussions. So
can I just jump in for a second? This has been raised as ballot comment, so I guess it's going to come up in ballot resolution as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which part, the cardinality? Or the support?
I think I might have seen one on my support as well, but the cardinality has definitely been raised as ballot comment.
Okay.
Well, ballot is still open, Heath. I'm pretty sure you're a voter. If there's a Jira here, you can add your vote to that, add it to the ballot submission.
So when does the ballot close?
Tomorrow.
Yes. End of tomorrow. Yeah.
So
end
will...
of this week?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And depending on the timelines, it might be later than that, but there's no guarantee because we might be on US time, so I'm not sure.
I was going to ask what is end of day?
Yeah, I think we might be on US time.
So if we are using the HL7 International Jira, then I think it will be US
East Coast.
Yeah, East Coast midnight. Or 1 minute to midnight.
So that gives you many more hours.
Right. FHL7 sent out a number of communiques about that to the ballot voters, so we'll leave it to that. If you've got any questions, please email HL7AU. We need to just close out the meeting, but before we do, we've got a thing that we actually have to really go through here. So these are the meetings. I'll make this available for what we're going to be doing. We can't go through them today and talk about how we're going to plan and manage this because we don't have time. We'll do that in the 18th of April to kick off our ballot resolution, including a briefing on what that process is. and then go through our ballot resolution meetings up until the face-to-face we have in Sydney on the 16th of May. You should have already got a communication about this. Hopefully, if not, there's a QR code here for Eventbrite to indicate that you will or won't be coming to the 16th of May. And there's a CDG that's talking about R2 of AUCDI the day before. I'll skip past this though. We can talk about it in the next meeting because we don't have time now. And go through to meeting times. So post daylight savings, that's the end of this week. So after tomorrow's Friday session, we will no longer be for one of our regional sets of people be at the same meeting time. So because it's been daylight savings, these Thursday meetings have been 12 for your Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra folks and 11 a.m. for the Brisbane folks. And the Friday session's been 2 p.m. for Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra and 1 p.m. for Brisbane. And we need to confirm what our times are going forwards on if we choose to keep the Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra times, keep the Brisbane times, or there's another time preferred. Noting we have very little time to discuss that, so I can update the meeting invites. So I'm going to watch a poll.
If we move off daylight saving, wouldn't the Brisbane and Sydney time be aligned? So therefore, it wouldn't be. It doesn't matter whether it is Brisbane or Sydney time, wouldn't it?
No, I don't think so. I think 11 a.m. for me.
Yeah,
it's no
Brisbane
longer
will
12
change.
for
Yeah.
Sydney. That'll be
Someone has to
be-
change.
Someone has to change. Yeah.
So let me launch here a meeting time poll, people. Pick your preferred Thursday time and your Friday time. If you can't cope with either of these times, you can prefer a different time. We'll need to discuss what that could be.
So I don't care.
Then don't vote. It's not required. You can choose not to vote if you are flexible. So only about 60 people have voted. Oh no, 6%. So we've got 70% of people have voted now. Give it a bit more to come through. Pick your preferred time. All right. Just giving it about 5 more seconds. Okay, so we've got some winners, which is great. So Thursdays, no one wanted a different time. So we're going to be moving to, I think, 11 a.m. on Thursdays for Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra. Brisbane keeps 11 a.m. And on Fridays, it looks like we are going to keep the Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra time and move the Brisbane folks to that 2 p.m. time. So that's what we're going to trial. I'll update the meeting invites probably next week because I'm really terrible at time zones, but I've got this information here and we'll see how that works out and if we need to change anything going forwards, we can. So I just wanted to make sure we had that before we stopped the meeting.
So does that mean that you will send out updated meeting invites?
Yes,
okay,
I will.
Cool. Thank you.
And I'll do that next week because we've still got tomorrow's Friday meeting at the same time. Daylight savings ends for next week. So I'll do that early next week and send out the updated times. Okay. I stopped sharing a little early. That's unfortunate. We also have the agenda for the next one, which is going to be usual business. We've got an update on AUCDI Release 1 that they're going to provide for us. Now they're going through their own comment resolution process on that. I was typing out the fact that we're walking through the telecom from Brett into this proposal. Heath, you've popped your hand up.
No, you go on.
We had originally sort of thought that this would now be briefing on how does ballot resolution work, and then get into actual ballot resolution activities. Now, Heath.
I see we've got Conformance Fridays.
We do.
And part of this procedure proposal is the more general principles about what it's based on. And you probably have a number of must support or conformance issues that you want to get to, but I would just like to have that, I guess, the principle of the must supports on choice or data type choice to be one of those at some point. And I think some of the other scenarios as well, where we've got, yeah. Anyway, I think that's a key one though. I mean, I think the name is the other scenario, like the complex types. So what does it mean to have must support on first name and family name? So those few things, I think we should just review some of those conformance items from US Core and see if they're principles that we should adopt beyond our level of complexity of must support at the moment, and make sure that we start to understand the implications of that. So
yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think folding those into Conformance Fridays, because you're right, they are about us discussing the obligations we think are appropriate on particular elements. I think that's a good idea, and I think that's a good place to move it.
And I think if I understand, we've got 2 weeks of Conformance Fridays before the next TDG. So if we can at least get an understanding of these principles, then we might be in a better place to actually vote on the proposal in 2 weeks' time.
All right, I'll work with you offline, Heath, to see what we can take through, noting that so far I think we've been largely having an educational kind of discussion about some of the basic FHIR principles on obligation, or maybe even capability statements and how do they work. And I think we do want to continue to do that in our Friday sessions. We'll touch base and see how we can talk about these topics in the Conformance Fridays. I think it's a good idea. All right, if there are no further comments or questions, we can close this meeting here. All right, thanks everyone. I'll see you maybe tomorrow, and if not, hopefully in a fortnight, Thursday. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.